Do you know what love is? In today's lesson, you will hear the word love 1,000 times. The Apostle Paul gives a wonderful lesson on what it means to love divine. Welcome to another edition of Sunday School with the Deek. I am Deacon Wallace Hill IV, proud member of the Mount Pisgah Missionary Baptist Church, where my father, the Wallace Hill III, is the pastor. Usually I open up my lessons by saying how happy I am to come into your living rooms, into your televisions and your cell phones and your tablets. But today, I'm going to say I'm happy because football season starts for my alma mater, Michigan State University. I'm getting this out the way this week because it's probably going to be a terrible season and we haven't lost a game yet, so I can be as happy as I want to be. And next week, we got to play Michigan, so I don't know how that's going to turn out. So I'm getting it all out the way this week. So for y'all Michigan fans, y'all just got to deal with me for 1 week at least. Now, unless we win, then you might have to deal with something else at a later date. But anyway, I just wanted to get that off my chest. Let's get serious. Thank you for tuning in and listening each and every week, y'all, as I break down these Sunday school lessons based on the International Lesson Series. For those of you who are new, please do me a favor. Take your little finger, go down to the bottom of the page and hit the subscribe button, then hit that little bell next to it. And every time the Deek uploads a lesson, ding, 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 you'll get a notification that the Deek has uploaded another lesson. We did get one additional subscriber last week. I'm happy for 1 or 100. So whoever that was, thank you for joining into the Deek Sunday School lessons. Today we're in our last lesson of our second unit of our fall quarter. The unit is entitled Inclusive Love. And this week we got another great lesson on love, y'all. It's a tremendous lesson on love. Last week it was love your neighbor. This week it's love divine. Now, divine is godly, right? It's the type of love that God gives and we should aspire to give. So let me give you the quick backdrop of today's lesson because we do this each and every week. The lesson takes place in the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians. A little background on why Paul wrote this letter to the Corinthians. Corinth was an important city. It was a wealthy city. It was on an isthmus separating northern and southern Greece. And the isthmus is a strip of land. It's kind of different than a peninsula. But the Corinthians were off the chain, y'all. It was Sin City. It was Vegas of the biblical times. And they were wicked. And the Apostle Paul spent 18 months there on his second missionary journey. And he established a church there. And that's this church that we're talking about today. Acts, if you look at chapter 18 in Acts, it gives us all the detail about Paul's work there in Corinth during that time. And at the end of his visit, he left and he went to Ephesus, Jerusalem, Antioch, and Galatia. And in his third year after leaving Corinth, he started getting rumblings of some things going on back in Corinth. And Paul is writing this letter in response to a report that he got from one of the members there. Her name was Chloe. If you look at verse 11 of chapter 1, her name was Chloe. And so she got in touch with Paul to tell him all the problems that were going on in the church. And this letter gives them some guidance on how to deal with those things that were going on. If you read the chapter, you hear a lot of the book, you hear a lot of things like say, and concerning this. So he's just dealing with a lot of problems in the church. Chapter 8 through 10, he's dealing with issues like eating food that had been sacrificed to idols. That was a big problem in the church. Chapter 11, he dealt with head coverings. He dealt with all the mess that was going on during the Lord's Supper. And then in chapters 12 through 14, he deals with the issues of spiritual gifts. And this chapter 13 falls in the middle of those. Because rather than celebrating their spiritual gifts, the Corinthian Christians had become prideful concerning their spiritual gifts and dismissive of other people's gifts. And so spiritual gifts have become a very divisive issue in the church. And so Paul concludes chapter 12 by saying, moreover, I show you a more excellent way. And these words kind of introduce chapter 13. And a lot of people think that that last verse of chapter 12 should have really started off chapter 13, but we won't get into that. So now that you understand the backdrop of the lesson, I need to give you a real quick refresher on what love is. Chapter 13 of 1 Corinthians is called the chapter of love, and it's one of the most heralded books ever written, not just in the Bible, but ever written about love. And so when you see the word charity in this book, you're going to see it all throughout this chapter today. It means love. When you see the word charity, it means love. In English language, we only have one word for love. But the Bible, in Greek, I'm sorry, my voice is a little off this morning. 4 words. First word is eros, which is the word for like passion, lust, desire, sex. And that word eros, you don't see that one in the New Testament. And then you got storge, which is a second word for love, which refers to like familial love, like family love, love between a parent and a child, or between family members in general. And then the next word is phileo. Phileo love is where we get the word Philadelphia, or the word philanthropist, which means brotherly love. The love you have for mankind, the love for human to human kind of love. And then the last love is agape love, which is the highest word for love. It's a divine love. It's the definition for God, because God is love. So chapter 12 talks about the gifts of the Spirit. If you read chapter 12, he talks about all those gifts of the Spirit that they were fighting about, like wisdom and knowledge and faith and healing and miracles and prophecy and discernment and speaking in tongues and interpretation of tongues. But they were all works of the Spirit. Chapter 13 talks about how you take those gifts and use them in love. And he's going to tell you that none of those gifts mean anything if love is not attached to them. So let's go ahead and get into the lesson. Verse 1. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not charity, I am become as sounding brass or tinkling cymbal. If you remember back in Genesis chapter 11, God confused the languages because the people, at first up until chapter 11, they all spoke one language. But God, after the flood, God confused the languages because of their disobedience. And so at the end of, when they had tried to build a Tower of Babel, God confused their languages. And at that point, there was like 70 different languages. Now, they say there's over 6,500 languages in the world. And I bet you won't know which is the languages most spoke in the world today. It's Mandarin Chinese. And it kind of goes back and forth between English and Mandarin Chinese, but right now it's Mandarin Chinese. So anyway, back to the lesson. Paul says, if I could speak every tongue, every language in the world under heaven, or if I could speak with the eloquence of angels, it doesn't matter if there's no love attached to it. That's what he's saying in verse 1. He says it just sounds like noise to people. Love gives meaning to words. Love comes from the heart, not from the tongue. You get what I'm saying? And that's why love is an action verb. Love is charity. We often think of charity, we think of giving. We think of doing. And that's how love is manifested by showing and not just talking. You can't convince me that a person will be happy in a relationship where all they get is talk and never get the show of love. If all a person ever does is say, I love you, baby, or she know I love her, or whatever, that don't get it. It has to be accompanied with some action and some show of love at some point. And if there's no love attached to anything, and it's all words, guess what? Paul says just a bunch of noise. And a bunch of constant noise gets what? Irritating. It gets distracting. And when you get a bunch of noise, you also get a bunch of shut-ups. I don't know if you remember the movie Coming to America. I know they're making a second one right now, but you remember when Eddie Murphy's character fell in love and he was walking through the streets at night singing "To Be Loved," and everybody was yelling out the window telling them, "Shut up, shut up." There, I got that for you.
Someone to kiss, someone to miss. When you're away through here, gone each day. To be loved, wow, what a feeling. To be loved, some wish to be a king or a queen. Some wish for fortune and fame. But to be truly loved is more than all of these things. Wow! Someone to care, someone to share lonely hours and moments of despair. To be loved.
See, when people don't understand your love language, all they hear is noise. So it sounds like a bunch of clanging to them, and they just want it to stop. These Corinthians had put so much stock in speaking in tongues, and it was for their own self-gratification that it had just become noise. That's the problem that Paul is addressing here. He said, if I can speak every language, it doesn't matter. It's just a bunch of noise if it's not laced with love. Verse 2, and though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains and have that charity, I am nothing. So Paul goes back to the gifts that I talked about in chapter 12. Chapter 12 talks about how the Corinthians were fighting over these gifts and the spirit of the gifts of the Spirit that God gave them. And Paul told them in the previous chapter, I'm glad I can speak tongues better than all of y'all. He said that. He wasn't bragging. He was just trying to drive home a point. Because Paul here singles out the gift of prophecy. And he says, but prophecy without love has no value. And it has no value to others, and it has no value to him. Paul says, Paul has some of the gift of prophecy, because in prophecy we're talking either foretelling or future events concerning Christ. And Paul says, if I had the gift of understanding of all mysteries, don't get me wrong, Paul had the gift of some mysteries, and that's how he was able to write 13 books in the New Testament. And God has given him some of that insight, but he didn't have all the gifts of mysteries. And in the second verse here, it was more so dealing with intellect, right? You see it, knowledge. We can all sit here and study and learn and understand the Bible, but without love, it means nothing. That's the problem. Too many people in the churches know a lot, but they don't love a lot. And that's why we can have churches filled with gossip and bitterness and hatred, because there's no love involved. And Paul said none of this means anything if love is not attached to it. And the next thing Paul talks about is faith, miraculous faith. the kind of faith that moves mountains. And that's a great achievement for somebody to have that kind of faith. But he says love is better than all of that in God's eyes. You know, Paul, if you look at this verse, Paul uses the word all 3 times. He says all mysteries, all knowledge, all faith. And he's talking about having the complete mastery of these things. Complete knowledge, complete, and it's like having a PhD at all of these things. But he said no matter how complete you are in all these things, it doesn't matter if love is absent from it. And that's why he's trying to drive this point home to the Corinthians. You got quit fighting over this other stuff. You got to have love. And so he was quoting here the idea that Jesus talked about in Matthew 17 and 20, where he talks about faith to move mountains. And it's amazing. It would be amazing to have that kind of faith. But it wouldn't mean anything without love. A man with that kind of faith to move mountains would probably just take that mountain and set it down right in the path of somebody else, or set it on top of somebody else. You got to have love attached to that faith. Verse 3, and though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. When you see the word though in all of these verses, he said, though I have knowledge and though I bestow all my goods, he says if. That means if I did this. So, or if I had knowledge, or it had the knowledge, or if I had the faith to move mountains. Just to throw that in there. Now, Paul talks about his will here. See, he went from the heart in verse 1 to the mind in verse 2 to his will in verse 3. He says love, love has to manifest itself if you're calling yourself a Christian. And so, by the way, if you're keeping score at home, prophecy has no points, knowledge has no points, faith has no points. And here he says, if I sacrifice everything to the poor, it still doesn't mean anything if it doesn't have love, so it has no points. You don't have any points until you add love to it. Love is 100. Love is 100. He says, if I give all my possessions to the poor, what does it matter if I hold my heart away? If I give my life for the faith of the gospel, it means nothing. That's what he says here. If I die, if I become a martyr, if I give my life, if I die for the word of God, it doesn't mean nothing if I'm doing it just to get famous. It has to have love attached to it. See, Christ showed us that when he laid down his life for man. John 3:16 says, for God so loved the world that he died. Right? Paul said, if I don't die without the love, if I die without the love, it doesn't mean anything. So when we're doing stuff, when we're giving food to the poor, when we're giving out turkeys, when we're doing all that stuff, if you're doing it for publicity, you're not doing it for the right reasons. Because if you really care about somebody, just do it. Don't tell anybody. Don't call the TV stations. Just do it. We ought to do more, but we need to do it for the love of people and not for self-serving measures to say we did it, right? Just to check off a box, or your organization does it because we say this is what we stand for, but it has to be done in love. Let's see. So each of these things described in the first 3 verses I read is a good thing, right? Tongues are good. Prophecy is good. Knowledge is good. Faith is good. Sacrifice is good. But love is the valuable piece here. And apart from love, those things mean nothing. Verse 4. Charity suffereth long and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself. It is not puffed up. So Paul begins here a few verses acting as though love is a person and shows that if love was a person, how would it act? How would it act? Love suffers long, or better yet, that means love is patient. Patient how? Patient in 2 forms. The first form of patience is in afflictions from God. And what do I mean by that? We believe that God allows some things to happen to us because what? He loves us. And when he allows those things to happen, we in turn love him so much that we show love even while we go through these things. So the second one is we are patient with other people. We're slow to anger, or we should be slow to anger when we are abused or when we are done wrong. We should not be quick to resentment. We should not be hasty to try to get revenge, but we should suffer long. We bear a whole lot, and we stay ready to forgive. That's love. Love won't just seize the opportunity to do good. That's good when you seize that opportunity, but what love should be doing is searching for opportunities to do good. Love will put up with all things. Love will put up with people. And now Paul switches it here and into this verse. He lists 8 things that love is not. So first he starts off with some things that love is. Then he goes to some things that love is not. Love is not envious. Love is not content with what it has. Love is content with what it has. And we all know there's inequality in this world, and there's always going to be inequality. But our jobs as Christians is not to get caught up in what other people have. You know, the Lord has blessed me with a beautiful family. I got a son, a daughter, granddaughter. I got a new wife, a new daughter, a decent job, home, beautiful friends, wonderful parents, and I give all the credit in the world to God. The Lord has blessed me so much, and I was thinking when we had our wedding in Jamaica last year, we had close to 50 people show up, and they were all there to celebrate us. No one was there putting their life in perspective based on what they were seeing in us. And that's how you know when you have arrived, when you could be happy for somebody, genuinely happy for somebody, in what they have, even if you don't have it, right? There was people there who had not been married before. There were people there who don't have children, but yet they didn't put their life in perspective based on that. It sounds cliche, but what God has for you is for you. Love does not get jealous. Love recognizes that there's going to be inequalities, but love also is content with what it has. And so Cain, if you remember in Genesis, the first murder in the Bible, Cain killed his brother Abel over envy. And we got to have the love of John the Baptist in us. Remember, John the Baptist said that I must decrease so that Christ can increase. You know, John could have had the attitude or been mad because Jesus was getting all the spotlight, but he said, I got to decrease so that he can increase. Love is not envious, y'all. The next part, love vaunteth not itself. That means love does not make a parade about itself. Sometimes people who seem to work the hardest at love are the ones who are furthest from love. And they do all these things that look like love, but they do it in the wrong spirit because it's parading itself. And so that's not love. That's more like pride by the appearance of love. Love is not boastful. People are turned off by boastful people. And I remember when I was a kid, I had a friend that lived in my neighborhood. And one day, me and my brother were outside playing, and our friend came rolling down the street with his mother in the car. And wait, let me put a pin in there for a second. I want to tell you, back in the late 70s, if you had McDonald's, that was a big thing. It wasn't like it is now where everybody go from the time you're a baby to the time you die. Going to McDonald's was huge back in the day. And it wasn't something you could just go to all the time. You had to make plans. It was like a big deal. On next Thursday, we're going to go to McDonald's. When I get paid, I'm going to treat y'all. So me and my brother were playing outside. And we see our friend rolling down the street. Me and my brother were outside, and we see our friend rolling down the street in the passenger side of his mother's car. And we went to wave just like we always do. And as he rolls by, this dude had his McDonald's bag in the window in front of his face. So they coming down the street, we go to wave, all we see is Ronald McDonald's face going down the street. I just remember being so jealous at the time. And I was so scarred by that event that I remember it to this day. And so when he was boasting and bragging about what he had, and so, but love doesn't do that. Now, I go to McDonald's every time I pass one just because of what happened to me back then in 1978, 1979. Anyway, all right, what else is love not? Love is not puffed up, which means to be proud or bloated with self-conceit. Love is not swelled with pride. If you have love in your heart, then you'll never think of yourself as being better than anybody else. The Corinthians were doing this based on the gifts that they had. And that's not having the love of Christ in you. Love does not start mess. Love calms anger instead of inciting anger. And love forsakes its own for the sake of others. I saw this poem somewhere that said, pride of face is obnoxious. Pride of race is vulgar. But pride of grace is the worst of all. And we cannot be boastful of the graces that God has blessed us, the grace that God has blessed us with, and the gifts that God has bestowed upon us. We can't be prideful about those things, thinking that you're better than others because you can sing and she can't, or you can pray and she can't, or you can God has given you certain gifts and haven't given it to others. You can't be prideful about that stuff. Verse 5. Love does not have itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil. Love does not behave itself unseemly, which means it doesn't act inappropriate or unreasonable. Love won't say bad things about people or drag people down. Love is not rude. You got some rude people in this world, man. And we are to be polite. Love behaves with courtesy and goodwill towards men. Next part, love seeketh not her own. What does that mean? Love asks the question, is this the right thing to do? Am I doing this out of the love of Christ? Or am I doing this to put the spotlight on me? Am I doing this selfishly or selflessly? Love is interested in how to assist other people. And so that's why it says love is not seeking spotlight on herself. Love is looking to help other people. Love is not easily provoked. This is one that we all got to work on, y'all. Love does not have a bad temper. If you become provoked, then guess what? You'll start to head down the pathway towards sin. If you get provoked, then that starts you to do something else that's not right. Remember earlier we said love is patient. When you have the love in your heart, you cannot be easily provoked, no matter how many buttons somebody push on you. When you have love in your heart, you don't snap, right? Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. Paul was treated so badly by so many people in so many towns, but he kept his focus. And that reminds me of how Martin Luther King did. He had love for the people. No matter how he got treated, he kept the love. We find it easily to be provoked or irritated. But being provoked is a sin because it isn't love. And Moses was kept out of the promised land because he became provoked by the children of Israel. They provoked him to disobey God. And the Greek word for provoke in this verse is paraoxentai. Oh my goodness. It has to do with being highly irritated or provoked to anger. And not being irritable or resentful is related to showing patience, and that's what we have to do. We have to aspire to be the person who's not irritable, to be the person who's not resentful or who doesn't have a quick temper and doesn't harbor resentments, right? Love is to endure slights and insults. Love thinketh no evil. That means that love does not attribute bad motives to other people. It's not suspect of other people, right? Of other people's actions. That means, we shouldn't be quietly giving a side eye to people, never trusting people who trying to do good or thinking that they have ulterior motives. Some people will never give people the benefit of the doubt. And they're always thinking that somebody got something behind what they're doing and always think people are up to something. And love doesn't think that way. Love searches for good. This verse literally means love does not store up memory of being wronged. That's a hard one. Love put away the hurts of the past and instead of clinging to the hurts of the past. We got to let some of that stuff go. Love lets that stuff go. And I know that's a tough one. So let's go to the next verse. Verse 6. Love rejoices not in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. Love does not rejoice in iniquity. And there's something in us, y'all, to enjoy seeing bad stuff happen to people, especially people we don't like. And there's something in us to get happy when we see a proud or powerful person go down, or there's a mean streak in our human nature that takes pleasure in doing things that we're not supposed to, or watching things happen that aren't good, right? And I remember when I was in school as a kid, I loved watching people fight, right? Oh, they're gonna fight after school, and there'd be a big crowd around, and watch somebody get beat down, and we're like, ooh, ooh. Even today on social media, you see stuff like that. And that's not the spirit of love. The person who loves with agape love will rejoice when people are doing good or have good things happen. And they're going to grieve when bad things happen to people. You have to ask yourself, what brings joy to you? What brings joy to you? Is it bad or good? If you hear something bad about somebody you don't like, do you rejoice in it? Or does it make you sad to see your enemy suffer? Be honest. And that's not so, I'm going to be honest with you when I say that as a Christian, we can't delight in somebody else's misfortune. No matter how much you don't like them, or no matter how bad they are. Now, I'm not going to say God won't punish others for messing with you, because he did say vengeance is mine. I'm not saying that, he won't bring vengeance on other people on your behalf, but the key is how you react when they go through it. You should feel bad for their suffering and not jump up and be giving high fives when they go through something. That's a hard one. Love rejoices not in the truth. Love rejoiceth in the truth. Love feels joy in seeing justice prevail. There's joy, just like there's joy in seeing somebody come to Christ. There's joy when we get a new convert that comes in and gets his keys to the mansion, the same mansion in the sky that you're gonna get. And you say, love doesn't say, well, how does he get a mansion when they just got saved and I've been in church all my life? Well, you know what? That's not love. Love welcomes new converts. Love rejoices in others gaining the same truth that you have. Verse 7. Love beareth all things. Love believeth all things. Love hopeth all things. Love endureth all things. Now Paul, he listed off some things that love is. Then he listed off 8 things that love ain't. And now he goes back and gives us 4 more things that love is. Love can handle a multitude of things. That's why it says it beareth all things. Meaning love bears the burdens of our fellow Christians. That's fulfilling the law of Jesus, y'all, that we love one another and that you bear your brother's burdens. That means you carry the load with them if they're going through something. Or if they can't carry it at all, you carry it for them. That's love. 1 Peter 4:8 says, love covers up a multitude of sins. We need to look to help others when they're wrong, not put them on blast. That's not love. The word bears can be translated as covers. So it says love covers things. Love does not publicize other people's failures, but it tries to cover them up. Love believeth all things. Now this doesn't mean that you just silly and foolish and you believe everything anybody say, but it means that you don't approach everyone with a raised eyebrow, like, thinking that everybody is suspicious. Love won't allow you to believe every bad thing about somebody. Love will try not to believe bad things about people. I got a relative, y'all, who just refuses to believe people have, ulterior motives. She has the love of Christ in her, and love is being unwilling to believe bad things about people, unless it's glaring, unless it's supported with evidence. And I hope you don't mind me saying this, Aunt Jackie, but I think of you when I read this verse. You always believe in the best in people, and I want to be just like that, to be honest. The next part, love hopeth all things. That means love is optimistic, y'all. Love hopes that all people will be saved. Love hopes for the day that we will all be in heaven. Love earnestly desires for the best of everybody in every situation. And love will make the best of everything. Love is always looking at a situation and seeing the glass half full, not half empty. Love endureth all things. To endure means to last. It stands the test of time. No matter what comes his way, love can stand it. Love remains strong even when you're going through a storm or when you're being tested. Love should be strong in all your afflictions, in all your tribulations, in all your temptations, in all your persecutions. Love has to remain, and love will endure all those things that you go through. That means that you still got to love even though you're going through it. And have you ever known somebody who may be going through something? So now everybody in their space got to be going through something. You know what I'm saying? We can't treat people bad just because we having a rough time. Look at this. If you go back through these verses and you replace the word love, everywhere you see love in this chapter, put the word Jesus, you will see that this makes perfect sense. You can easily say Jesus suffers long. Jesus is kind. Jesus does not envy. And you can do that throughout this whole chapter. But we can also measure ourselves. We can measure our spiritual maturity and see how it sounds when you put your name in these verses. Try to do that. Put your name everywhere that love is. Put your name and see are you there. Wallace endureth all things. Wallace is not boastful. Wallace is, and see if you have made it. And see if it sounds ridiculous or see if it sounds far-fetched. And that's why Paul put this in his chapter in the middle of 12 and 14 because of the discussion of spiritual gifts. Paul wanted the Corinthian Christians to know that spiritual gifts is not your measure of spiritual maturity. Because they were thinking, oh, I got it now. I speak in tongues. I've arrived. No, he said that doesn't matter. Love is what matters. Verse 8. Charity never faileth, but whether there be prophecies, they shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. Love never fails. Love does not fail. Love endures. Love is permanent. Love will be standing there in the end when all the other gifts are gone. And that's why he says here, prophecies fail. That means that prophecies are predicted, right? And then when they happen, guess what? They're history. Tongues will cease. He's saying, once we get to heaven, there's only going to be one tongue. So what does it matter if you spoke in tongues down here? Knowledge will vanish. What I learned at Michigan State between 1988 and 1993, that's outdated, right? Knowledge will vanish. Now there's new knowledge. Unlike love stands the test of time. Prophecy, speaking in tongues, knowledge, that's all going to come to an end when the kingdom of God is realized. It's not that these are not good gifts, y'all. We're not saying that. It's just these people were fighting over this stuff. And Paul says in the end, none of this is going to be there, but the one thing that will be there is love. Verse 9. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. He's saying here that we don't know it all. Even the patriarchs of the Bible, Moses and Isaiah and Isaac and everybody, they and the apostles, they only knew a little bit. He gave them little nuggets of knowledge. Even Solomon, who was known as the most knowledgeable man, wisest man ever walked the earth, he didn't get it all. He gave them little nuggets of prophecy. He didn't give it all to one person. Everybody got a little piece for their particular time in history. And so God didn't give it all to one person. So even Paul, who wrote all of this, understood that he didn't have it all. That's why he says, we only know in part. We only know a little bit. And we only prophesy with that little bit that God gave us. Verse 10. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. He says, so when you get to heaven, when we get to heaven, then that little bit of knowledge that you gave us down here, it's going to be gone. So, we will, at that point, when we get to heaven, we'll get it all. But right now, the little bit we have, when we get to heaven, is going to be gone. And so we will clearly, all knowledge and all holiness and everything, we'll know all of that when we get to heaven. It won't be in part. And we'll clearly understand God at that point. And he says the gifts of partial knowledge and partial prophecy, that'll be gone away. Verse 11. When I was a child, I spake as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. And we hear this verse a lot, and it's really taken out of context, but it does mean what it means. But when he says this, he's talking about these spiritual gifts and how, the things that we think are important now, when we get to heaven, we're going to see that they're not important at all in the grand scheme of things. So when you first read this, you think that Paul is rebuking the Corinthians, who clearly have failed to put away childish things. But that's not his intent here. He's really trying to contrast the world as we know it to the world that we're going to see when we get to heaven. And once we get to heaven, we'll see that all of the stuff that we think is important down here now is really not as important. And so he's comparing spiritual maturity to that of a child maturing in natural life. So he's still trying to drive home his point about these gifts of speaking in tongues, because those people who could do it thought they had everything, right? Paul is saying that the Holy Spirit can get more of you when you realize that there's more to Christianity than speaking in tongues, right? If you stuck on speaking in tongues, then all you're doing is riding down the street with your McDonald's bag in the window. You know what I'm saying? Guess what? You got to eat again tomorrow. And when you get older, you'll realize that whether it's McDonald's or beans and hot dogs, it's still just to feed your natural body. So Paul is saying there has to be some spiritual progression here. And so for some of you guys, Sunday school with the Deek, that's spiritual progression. When you go to Bible study, that's spiritual progression. That's growing. And so when you're a child, you're expected to act a certain way, right? But as you get older, your expectations shift, which they should. Same thing in your spiritual life. You can't just stay in the same spot and grow. That's why Paul is so upset with these Corinthians, because 3 years later, they fighting over stuff that he didn't even talk about. And that's the thing, doesn't it bother you when people who, the biggest hell raisers in church are the ones that have been there 50 years? It makes you bad, because he should have grown. The ones that sit in the front of the church or the front of the class, the ones that give you the hardest time and make you cry. We got to mature and we got to grow. If you came to Christ at 20 years old, you still can't be sucking on a pacifier in church at 50. You got to grow. Verse 12. For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as I am known. This is a hard verse to read, King James wise, but it's got a whole lot in it. He says, Paul says that when we look in a mirror dimly, what he's saying there is we can only see a little bit right now. The total picture is not clear. It's just a dim reflection of what we'll see when we get to heaven. But when we get to heaven, we will not see dimly as a reflection from a bad mirror. We'll see face to face. And right now we can't fully understand it all. We look through a glass darkly. That's what that means. But once we get face to face with Jesus, we can see the whole kit and caboodle, y'all. All things will be crystal clear. The song says you'll understand it better by and by. There won't be no go-between, right? There won't be no preacher or no teacher in the middle. You can go to God for yourself, and you can ask him whatever you want, and you can find out whatever happened. You can say, Jesus, back in 1983, I was going through this, and what was you trying to tell me? You know? And so when he talks face to face, he's saying that you'll be there face to face. Not like Moses. When Moses had that situation in the book of Numbers where he was talking to God and it said they saw him face to face, but that wasn't really face to face. He saw it was a figure of speech describing a certain intimacy. But here he's really talking face to face, right? When we get to heaven, we want to see the streets paved with gold. We want to see our relatives from the past. We want to see all those things, but guess what? The most joyous thing of all of it is that you get to know him just like he knows you. Oh my God, that's going to be the greatest experience in heaven. Last verse 13. And now abideth faith, hope, charity. These three. But the greatest of these is charity. So he says, of these things that he talked about in this whole chapter, 3 of them will last forever. Faith, hope, and love. But even out of those 3, love is the greatest. Because love never fails. Love outlasts everything. And love is the greatest work of the Spirit. We won't need faith anymore because the object of our faith, Jesus, is going to be fulfilled. He'll be right there with us. Our hope's going to be realized because there'll be nothing left to hope for. We'll be in heaven. Love is going to abide forever because we'll be with God, and God is love. So, God is the greatest of love. And faith and hope are not part of God's personality because God doesn't need faith because he's never had to trust anybody outside himself. God does not have to have hope because he knows all and controls all, right? So God is love and will always be love. So that's the end of today's lesson. If we lose love, we have lost everything. So I'm not even going to try to do any takeaways from today's lesson like I do every week because I think it kind of spoke for itself. Love is key, y'all. Love is everything. And without love, there's nothing. So I wish I could take a minute to get myself together from this, but the clock is ticking. Next week, we'll be starting our last unit of the quarter called Godly Love Among Believers. And we'll be in the book of John, chapter 13, verses 1 through 15, 34, and 35. The lesson is entitled Loving by Serving. Okay, so here is another lesson. And thank you for the comments, y'all. Last week I heard from Gina and Jackie, my cousin Keith, my Aunt Margie, Sister Gray, and Sister Shirley Williams called me to tell me how much she enjoyed it. And my mom and my lovely wife who keeps me on my toes with these lessons, making a point to talk to me every week about it. Sister Boo, my cousin Lisa, Patty, Brother Miller. So just thank all of y'all who comment or let me know that you're watching. And I know there's a ton of others out there that aren't saying anything, but if you ever get over your shyness, let me know because it does your boy a world of good. So anyway, as we say every week, may the Lord watch between me and thee while we're absent one from another. Amen. Sunday school with the Deek. Go Green!